Welcome to Care Smarts 360 on air. This is a home care podcast, and today I'm going to be hosting. My name is Carolina Gonzaga, one of the sales executives here at Care Smarts. Today, I'm introducing somebody that I know well and that I really appreciate. I'm so excited to welcome Phil Vlach. Now, if Phil Vlach doesn't sound familiar to you, you really need to listen to this podcast for sure. Phil Vlach is one of the biggest influencers here in Canada when it comes to all things age tech, especially senior living operations. Now, Phil Vlach wears many hats, so I want to really give light to all of those hats as they're all really important, not only to introducing who he is, but also the conversation. So Phil Vlach oversees innovation and IT at Schlegel Villages, which is one of Canada's premier senior living operators. This is a family-started, Canadian-owned and managed company that really runs some of the most wonderful and full spectrum of care communities in the country. And really take the lead in piloting and adopting the best of technology. He also is the founder of AgeTech Labs, which is an organization tasked to bridge the gap between senior living operators and the innovators and founders that look to partner with them. It's all about helping operators make the right decisions and leading technology leaders into developing all of the things that we really need in this space. And finally, he is the founding member of the Toronto chapter of AgeTech Toronto. AgeTech is an organization with chapters all over North America, and they are also missioned to really push age tech and see where we can come together as a group as we push into the future. So today I'm going to be talking to Phil about all of the above and all sorts of other things. So hold on to your hats. I'm so excited to welcome my good friend, Phil Vlach. Welcome to the podcast, Phil.
Hi, Carolina. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited. You're like the first person that I've brought into the podcast. And so this is an exciting day for me as a newer member of Care Smarts. And being able to talk to you in a different setting. I usually see you in person, and here we are virtual, working backwards.
That's
But
great.
nonetheless, so when I thought about how I would introduce you, I got kind of confused because you really are a man that does a lot of things, in the space, as well as outside of the space. But I think like a lot of our listeners are going to be not familiar with who you are and your expertise, nor your role at Schlegel Village or Age Tech Lab. So without overwhelming you with this big question, we'd love to just hear a little bit about who you are and, where you've come from in the space and Age Tech Labs, and also your role at Schlegel Village, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely. I'd love to give you a little background. So I've been in technology all my life. So I am a technology-based person. That is my background. And I came into senior living about 8 years ago, and I've always been on the operator side. So, my day-to-day is really working at the operator level in the operator environment, doing technology on behalf of the operator. Initially, I started with Amica a few years ago, or at the beginning of that career. And then I've been with Schlegel Villages now for 3.5 years, leading their technology team. And we try to think of it as really technology because, IT is only kind of a slice of that, right? And when I say IT, it's what people think of as the traditional cybersecurity, Wi-Fi, phone systems, and so on.
Forgotten passwords.
Lots of forgotten passwords, yes, and applications too. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's kind of traditional IT, very important. But we also, at Schlegel Villages, we like to say we have innovation in our DNA as co-founders of the Research Institute of Aging and working closely with universities. And as part of what our founders have brought to the company as well. And so in that vein, we are very innovation oriented, and that kind of branches into what we would maybe refer to as age tech. And when I talk about age tech, it's kind of a really broad category of technologies, but it's really technologies that help older adults age in the way they want to age. And there could be, there's still some great work being done around how to parse or break down those categories and so being more meaningful, in the sense of like, is an iPhone that is set up for an older adult's tactile and visual preferences, is that considered age tech? Well, maybe it's more like universal tech, right? Whereas other things would be more sort of consistent with what we would refer to as age tech. So that's kind of my life at Schlegel Villages on a day-to-day basis. And then about 2-3 years ago, I came to the recognition that operators were a bit underrepresented in the marketplace around their needs and interests related to technologies. And what I mean by that is I saw a lot of activity in the startup space and in the funding space, and through AgeWell and Cabby and others. That's really great and important work. And then a lot of funding coming from the government levels, various government levels, and all these startups popping up and wanting to build great products in this space. But sometimes not being able to connect to operators. So a lot of activity on the innovator side, but then on the operator side, difficulty for those innovators to connect into those operators and create those relationships. And then the operators being overwhelmed by technology in general. And then in addition to that, this new technology and all this innovation, and really having trouble, I think, having the capacity even to think about and how to think about that. And then the skills in many cases to think about how those technologies might work for them or how they might fit into their portfolio. So all that to say that I thought operators should be better represented in terms of their interests, and that they could even use a hand. And so AgeTech Labs was born out of that. And really what I try to do with that is provide operators guidance around technology selection. And so I work with a couple of other operators as well doing that. And it could be choosing, what we would like EHRs or finance systems, but it could be also choosing age tech related products. So guiding them through that process of selection, figuring out really what's important is what is the right fit for them. Because you have the point click cares, you have the Yardies, for example, for electronic health records, you have new companies like Finn, you have August Health. One is not the best. I think it's what is the best one for you as an operator. And so it's a process. And so helping operators go through that selection process, I find really fulfilling because I feel like I'm helping them make good decisions. And generally, I think it's helpful for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, where we have in common is coming from the senior living space. And, I come from a time where there's almost no adoption of technology. I mean, communities that I worked in were scared of things like Instagram, let alone adopting, a really sophisticated CRM, for example. So, like, what would you say is the overall kind of beginning of the change of operators starting to look at technology, and now you're looking to bring them to the table to talk to vendors? Kind of how do you see this looking past? Is this something that was within the past 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, I still think we're sort of at the early stages of this, right? And I think, a lot of operators don't have Wi-Fi throughout their communities yet. They just have it in certain locations. And, on an everyday basis, you and I think about Wi-Fi like water, like it's a utility these days, right? And kids, when I say kids, people coming out into the workforce now that are younger are anticipating and expecting that kind of technology to be prevalent and available. So I think you're seeing market pressure from the inside, really, and yet, and I think that has to be balanced with, on the innovator side, the operator, the residents that are living in those communities typically are north of 70 or 80 sometimes, and they're not really dependent on technology very much, and they still are most, and I'm generalizing a lot here, but people still use landline telephones. They like televisions. They will have iPads and lots of other technologies, but it's certainly not the same kind of dependency as the younger generation coming in that are team members working at those villages, right?
Yeah.
And so I think some introduction of technology through the team members coming in that way and that expectation. And I think operators are realizing, and particularly I think COVID accelerated some of this realization. Operators are realizing that technology is a necessity to some degree, right? And it helps with both outcomes for residents and team members, and also for just the smooth working or efficiency of a community.
Yeah. So knowing like the technology, and we've known each other through other, iterations of my career as well. So like currently I represent CareSmarts 360, which is of course a home care app. And so when I think about age tech, we fit into that category, but then of course we also service agencies that care for all sorts of public. So it's not just in age tech. Um, so just thinking about age tech and thinking about health tech and how that intersects with just general age tech, health tech, I'm wondering, I'm thinking about, certain platforms that are going to streamline operations in a senior living community, to a home care community, to your smart home, to AI helping you streamline, nurses' roles, typically taking a little bit less, giving them less time to work on paperwork and more time doing that high value, or to robot companions. So you've got a lot of options when you're looking to assess and help operators assess and meet with new founders and new projects. Is there one area right now currently that you feel is really driving innovation right now, and that might be the focus as we move through this kind of period of time?
Yeah, so obviously there's lots of discussion around AI, and what I would say to operate, and I'll just clear that off the table first, is
Okay.
what I would say to operators is really it's evolving really quickly. I mean, we're moving from large language models, so that that ability to interact using voice with computers and other devices, to really those devices now being able to take action, either on our behalf or to do things, right? And so we're moving what we call LLMs to LAMs, and that's going to be the next 12 to 18 months. So for operators, and I think people in the industry, what's important is just get familiar with the tools that are available and how they work, and really play around with it. I don't think there's any rush to implement anything. And additionally, I think a lot of what will be implemented will come through the tools that you already have. So I'll take an example with Point Click Care. In a discussion I had with them last year on a panel at the this is OLTCA conference, they their focus for the next period of time is really to use AI to gather and surface insights from the data that's already in their system, right? So
Right.
so basically using AI to mine the data better.
Right. So
And
the data is being built and already there, and it's really using it to say something else.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's not really like that's nope. It's not really a really what I would call a sexy kind of
Yeah.
application, but it's super important.
Yes.
Not really very exciting, I guess, when someone tells you that. And we tend to like to think of some of these things as more exciting. But for example, I think one of the great areas in using AI would be to, like you said, alleviate that caregiver burden, whether it's home
Mhm.
care or senior living, it doesn't really matter. It's that interaction between the caregiver and the resident or the older adult. If that was automatically documented, summarized, and then
Yeah.
integrated into a record of some sort with the necessary quality and accuracy, that would do two things. One is you wouldn't have to try to do that yourself as the caregiver, either after your shift or at the end of the visit, by typing and so on. So you'd save time. And the other thing is you would have much better quality of data coming in, because you're losing, 70% of that data through transcription, as we're doing it now. So, and I think that helps us that gives us a better view of the older adult and their situation as well, which I'm hopeful would lead to better outcomes as well, for them. So
Yeah.
that's kind of my view on AI. So, but where I do think it's really cool is we've been doing some work with sensors and sensor systems over the last couple of years, and I would say last year and the year before, there seemed to be a lot of companies coming out with new types of sensors. And
Mhm.
when I mean sensors, it's people, companies that would come up with devices that could either measure sleep or activities of daily living, or fall detection is, obviously a big one. And this was, I would say, started originally a couple of years ago with the Novi lamp, but then moved into more discrete sensors, smaller sensors, and they all are fairly good, but I think they're all working on their own. And the challenge with that is that if it's just one sensor trying to detect something like a fall, you can have a lot of false positives or a lot of false negatives. And so,
Mhm.
just mathematically, if you add another sensor that's not related to the first sensor and it tells you the same thing happened, then now your probability has gone like from the 80s to the low 90s.
Yeah.
Is actually the case, and or thereabouts. And then if you add a third sensor, now you're in the high 90s. So all of a sudden
Mhm.
you come to the realization that the sensor is important and the quality and fidelity of the sensor is important, but maybe what's more important is how you pull all those information together to say, oh, I heard these inputs from these three sensors and they're telling me this event has happened. Okay, it's probably happened. So I think there's
Yeah.
some really interesting work going on there.
Well, you just explained that like sensors for dummies, so I really appreciate that, Phil. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so almost like perhaps, I think of as a layperson, I would say, I think of sensors as sensors, but there's also needs to be almost like an integration between them. Not even quite an integration, but just like it is a game of numbers, and the more you have, it's about like the data being more accurate.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that particularly has applications to both what we'd refer to as senior living, so long-term care, senior living, but also home care, right? Because
Yeah.
providing, providing not really diagnostic, but support services through these sensors could be a great way of um, providing services and support to older adults living at home as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I think about even my experience. I was a PSW for 9 years, and just the way that you devote your time. I mean, a lot of it is, going from point A to point B, maybe realizing that nothing's needed, or
Mhm.
following, a care plan that was, that was really built by somebody's has some perspective that is coloring that care plan. Things change. How often are they being reassessed? And so I also just think about the quality of care. I'm wondering, and maybe this is completely maybe off topic, and you let me know. Just thinking about what you've said and the values of, you know, kind of, really allowing practitioners, nurses, healthcare aides, anyone from being able to really use more time making a difference in a real way to helping the caregiver burden and maybe reducing some of the, employee challenges that we have, as well as being able to spend money in the right resources, knowing what people actually need specifically and also on a large scale. What are we seeing in either Canada, US, both, in terms of like funding to really invest in this? Because it seems like there's a lot of aspects of what you've talked about that would help, just in Canada, like our healthcare system to be more efficient. And that's a whole other can of worms. Are you seeing conversations about that, increases in funding, a focus on that on like, a federal or provincial level?
Uh, yeah, so I think as you said, there are different sources of funding available. I would say that one of the ones that I've seen recently that has been really good is the couple of programs from CABI
Yeah.
that have really focused on not just the, I would say not just the investigation or research stage of things, but actually helping operators um, deploy and scale up technology. So helping potentially go through that process of selection for operators as well, but then allocating or making funds available for the operators to do a trial and then a scale up through those things as well. And I think that's a really nice shift that we're seeing kind of in that availability of funds. I mean, I think there's always funding available for research and so on. And the other one is we are seeing, through AgeWell and Envisage, there is some pretty good traction there around getting technology into the hands of operators to work with them and then potentially scale them up as well. Uh, I'm always an advocate of saying, what is the problem that we're trying to solve for? And let's be really intentional about doing that. So the funding is definitely an important component, I think, for operators. But I think even before you go down that road, it's so important to say, what problem is it that we have, and what are we trying to solve for? And that's one of the things I try to coach operators through as well. And we've done, with my colleague Laura Bryn Martin at Schlegel Villages, we've done a lot of work in the last couple of years, thinking through that, and also building a program internally that helps guide us through that process as an organization.
And is this kind of getting into the aspect of also AgeTech Labs of Scout?
Yeah, exactly. So thanks. That's exactly it.
Enter Scout to the conversation, Phil.
Yeah, thank you for the prompt. Yeah, so if we look at, internally at Schlegel Villages, we looked at different frameworks for considering why we would bring technology in, right? So the first question that needs to be answered is, why would you do something? And so let's be intentional about it. So we looked around for frameworks that existed, and again, many of the frameworks that we discovered, and some really good ones, including out of the KTH framework out of Sweden, they were structured from the perspective of either the startup or the investor. So again, nobody really looking at it from an operator perspective. There are some others from Briere and so on. In some cases, we thought some of those were a little complicated, and even that, our first iteration of this was pretty complicated, and we made it a lot easier as well. But ultimately, what we came down to is we want to look at 4 things, and the 4 things are market readiness. So essentially, what is the problem and who's asking about the problem and how big is the problem? And ideally, you would have someone internally, put up their hand and say, I have this giant problem I need solved. And then you would see if there's a technology solution application to it. And if so, that's great, and so on and so forth. But often, the other problem we were trying to solve for is people go away to conferences, they see stuff on TV, they see, a variety of different inputs, or through the stuff they read, and they come to us and they say, wouldn't it be great if we did this? How do you respond to that in a structured fashion, right? Yeah, it would be great. Does it meet some requirements that we have, or does it solve a problem that we're having? So sometimes it's cart and horse a little bit. So, okay, first question though to answer is there a problem? How big is it? The second question to answer is, if we're looking at technology to solve it, do we have a technology space that can address it? So are there a couple of products basically that we could choose from? The third one is kind of the strategy and business one. And this one's really important. I think people forget about this one is, does it align with our strategy? So, and with our core values, right? And so, for example, if I'm an operator and my core value is interaction with residents, like maintaining that one-on-one people interaction with residents, then maybe equipping my care team with tablets to do notes at point of care is not a great idea, right? There may be some tension there. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's the first question about that one. And the other one is, do I have the money to fund the pilot? Like if I have to pay for it, and because often they're free. And the other one is, can I allocate funds, both money and resources, to scaling up after the pilot? And do I know what that looks like? So essentially, it's thinking through some of these things ahead of time, right? And then the final one is really, are my teams ready? Will my team be ready to accept or onboard and integrate whatever solution I'm looking for? And I mean, I have a great example of where that wasn't the case in one location, where it was the case in another. So anyway, so that's a long way of saying it's important to be intentional about these things. It's great to have a framework to help you. The tools come next, and that's really where Scout comes in. And Scout is a way of for operators to kind of sanity check their idea. And it's an AI powered tool that understands exactly what I just told you around that framework, and allows you, we'll have that dialogue with you around, oh, Carolina, you asked about new EHR or a smart toilet. Well, okay, let's talk about that. And here's kind of how it looks from those dimensions that we just discussed and how it might fit into your technology.
Yeah, and imagine you were like, I actually found a technology that does both a new EHR and a smart
There you go.
toilet.
That would be
It's coming. You heard it here first. It's coming from Phil's mouth himself. And I'm wondering if the framework created in Scout is something that could be applied to other models, or is it specific to operators?
well, yeah. So ironically, I've had a lot of innovators come and talk to me about it as well, and they've been using it because
Okay.
for them it gives them a great way of being able to talk to operators. So if it's asking about things that are important for operators, then they can see how their solution stacks up against it, and then they can either refine their solution, or they can have that have a good conversation with the operator around, oh yes, well, I see these things are important to you, so we can have a better dialogue about that.
Yeah, well, one of the things you mentioned from kind of the Scout dialogue, the process, the way of thinking, is are my teams ready to adopt? And as a former, person on the operator side that needs to convince a lot of people that have been working somewhere for a long time that are really happy with whatever the process is, even though it's not working on a scalable level. The first thought is, well, they're going to need to get ready. But then what I started to think about with what you said is maybe it's a step back and figure out, how do we get them ready? How do we prepare them for this change that will likely happen? And so there's a lot of, from that framework, even just from you describing it, there's a lot of ways that I'm already seeing how it would help. I think about in home care in the US, when, clock in, clock out EVV all of a sudden became a completely standard practice, and how overwhelming that must have been for, caregivers forever that just were doing paper. And to be transparent, I talk to people that are still doing paper today. But there's that balance of like, you just got to make the change and everyone's just going to have to get in line. But then there's also like, well, how do you make it a little less painful by being more strategic about it? So even from a people perspective, shout out to Scout and AgeTech Labs, because it's a tool that can be used from all sorts of perspectives, I think, even if it's just one piece of it from, what your role is in an organization. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this is why I love chatbots like ChatGPT and so on, and Scout is amongst them. Is really, it's a dialogue, so you can go down different aspects of it, as you say, different dimensions of the ideas.
yeah. And so can anyone go on the website and check it out?
Yeah, actually, we so there are two ways. One is, you can, if you have a ChatGPT subscription, it's one of the custom chatbots in the Explore GPT area. But we do have a free online version that is just Scout Spotlight at agetechlabs.ai.
Okay.
Sorry, scoutspotlight.agetechlabs.ai.
We'll drop the link.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I was just thinking, like, on a more personal level, is like, should I get my mom a smartphone? Right. And I'm using Scout in my mind. But would it cause more problems than help? Correct. So I'm already thinking of ways on a personal level of like, yeah, Scout told me no, let's keep it simple.
I'm sure you'll challenge it. That's perfect.
Yeah. So knowing that, kind of, we've talked a lot about senior living operations, and now I've moved into the home care space with, Care Smarts, and I'm starting to see a lot of overlap in my conversations, especially when we're talking about technology. Um, you know, in the past, working in senior living operations and whatever innovations are coming or whatever businesses are being built in the community, I always felt a bit of tension, between senior living of like, oh, this home care company is going to create a space where maybe they're not going to want to move into the community. So when we look at this, is age tech a space where we can all work together, or do you see kind of one part of the business, like senior operators or home care, benefiting more than the other? I'd love for you to speak to that and teach and give me some talking points.
That's a really loaded question. Thanks.
Yeah. I want to keep you on your toes, Phil.
Yeah, I think, I think we're at the early stages of this. I mean, we've maybe been in the industry, like many people, for quite a while. But ultimately, it's, I would about 22 to 25% of the Canadian population by 2030 will be over 65, and so we're seeing that large cohort move through those years, and and I think it's important to think about that from a continuity perspective. So, very basically, to answer your question, there's room for everybody for a long time, I think. So it's a matter of, I think it will be a matter of how do we collaborate together, in fact, over
Yeah.
because I think, like I said, there's room for everybody. One of the things that I think that I've started thinking about more is the context of the 100-year life, right? Because when we're used to thinking of the cohort or seniors as being, or older adults as being 65 and older. Well, if you're living to near 100, that's another 30, 35 years. And people born today, and even in the last decade, are more or less forecast in North America to live to 100. So I think we have to change our mindset a little bit around the 65 threshold, and really think about, it's just the number, and really where are we in life, and what are the different things that we're experiencing in life. And there's a book I'm reading now called Stage Not Age, which really thinks through that and says, if we're having if we're typically expecting a 100-year lifespan, 65 and up is a really complicated space, because you could be 65 and super healthy, or 80 and super healthy, or you could have needs, or everybody will be in a different stage. So it's more about the stage, not the age. And I think a lot of opportunity for innovation to address that as well.
Almost like maybe, in the next 15, 20 years, we might even just, this way of speaking about these stages will be obsolete. We'll be speaking about it in a different way. I think of a friend of mine. I spent Easter with him. He's 97 years old. He curls half the year. He golfs half the year. He claims to be declining because he has to use the golf cart a little more, that he has to work all of the holes. And I think, the possibilities are endless. So what a eye-opening conversation, Phil, as always.
Thanks,
Lots to think about. Yeah. And so we're so happy to have you today. And we're going to drop the link to AgeTech Lab so that people can learn more about Scout, as well as sharing the mission of Schlegel Village as well. Everyone check it out. When I worked in the senior operating space, Schlegel Villages was the one to be beat. They have everything. They're a fantastic and innovative organization. And I found out from Phil today that they have a couple of food robots. So that's cool too.
Yes, it's a great place to be, for sure.
Absolutely.
I would say one thing that we didn't talk about is the whole AgeTech Toronto bit, which is really a way for people to get involved in the community and in the industry that maybe don't have a place to do that. And so we host events every 2 months or so. We just had one earlier this month, and it's open to everybody. So we hope people can come out and chat about AgeTech.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was there, and it was a great event, and I can't wait to see you, Phil, at the next one. Thank you so much.
Okay.